Good evening and a very warm welcome to all of you here. As we all know that this lecture series is in loving memory of our teacher, Professor A.K. Singh, who is known to most of us here. Singh sir was an establisher of institutes, as we all know that he has established institutes like Department of English at Saurashtra University, Rajkot. Then he has also shaped up and established entire KCG. He was also very much there when the entire infrastructure and the establishment of new premise of Baba Sahib Ambedkar Open University of Ahmedabad took place. He was the vice chancellor at that time. Uh, then he moved on to the Center for Translation Studies and Training at IGNOU, Delhi. And during his last days, he was provost at Oro University, Surat, where he shaped up the Department of Humanities, which is flourishing again. So we all know that he was an establisher and beginner of new things, new ideas. I'm not going into the deliberate, the large number of publication by Sir because we all know him through his works equally, written works rather. Singh Sir, like the epic hero he was and he will be for all of us, was an is a living tradition of values, integrity, commitment to truth, pursuit of knowledge to all of us at the department, and we shall try to live by the values that he has imbibed. Sir had a passion, as we all know, of connecting things, literature, with reality and classroom learning, and vice versa. That is why he believed in interdisciplinarity. Taking an inspiration from his practice of linking interdisciplinarity of reality, the Alumni Department of English, Saurashtra University, has organized this lecture series, and one of the key concerns of our time is climate change. So the series we begin with is on climate change. The title, as we all know, is that changing climate, ecology and literature. Our first speaker today, Miss Bijal Bachrajani. Our speaker today is having an experience of 17 years in the field of writing, communication, and education for sustainable development. She is a recipient of Ottokar Children's Book Award in 2020. She is a passionate writer, a writer who calls herself a warrior of climate change. Especially, she is more concerned about women's role in the changing climate in the age of Anthropocene. She believes that writers, illustrators, and editors must come together to create an awareness regarding climate change for creating an awareness amongst people, especially the children. Besides being an author, she is a senior editor at Prathama Books. She was also associated with PETA, Disney Adventures, Asia Pacific, Fair Trade India, and Sanctuary Asia during their distinguished projects. Her writings have been published in major and reputed magazines and dailies online as well as offline. She has also helped set up 50 Abhiyan libraries, community libraries, for communities across India. Last but not the least, that she has been invited to various literary festivals as a speaker at Kolkata Literary Festival and Bangalore Literary Festival as well. I welcome Bijal ma'am. Platform is yours now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vaishnav, and thank you so much, the Alumni Association and the Department of English. Um, so I just want to say that I don't want to make this very formal, so I will have questions for all of you in the middle because hey, this is children's books, and I'm used to talking to children, and they expect to be asked questions and to be listened to. So I'm going to expect the same out of you. So we'll begin with a small. I'm going to just start presenting my. Okay. So we're going to be talking about children's literature and climate change framing in children's literature with a focus on India. I'm going to start by asking you a question, and I'd love it if you could put your answers in the comment box, in the chat box. My question is, what books did you read as a child? Ruskin Bond, says Sarani. Comics. I also read Ruskin Bond in comics. Fairy tales, stories of animals and birds. Alice in Wonderland. I just reread Alice in Wonderland. Fairy tales. Panchatantra. Yes. Charles Dickens. Yes. So many essays on Charles Dickens had to be written. Ramayana, Tinkle. Kabuliwala actually is perhaps one of the first stories, one of the first films that I remember. Chanda Mama, very much going on. Amar Chitrakatha, yes. Adventure stories. Archie's, yeah. My sister, I think, who's listening, has been responsible for introducing me to Archie's comics, so thank you. Mark Twain. Roald Dahl. You know, I really wish I was a child when Roald Dahl started getting available in India, but we'll talk about that. Pulvari, yes, epic stories. How many of you remember Bakor Patel? My mom used to read that to us, and yes, and that was this goat. Yes, Gijubai Bharekar. And there was this. It was this goat. Bakor Patel was, and all his friends were animals, and they lived in a very typical Bombay building. And I know when we shifted to Bombay, a lot of the city looked familiar to me because of Bakor Patel. So yes, thank you so much for. Yes, I think Sanjay is right. The Bengali literature for children, especially, is very, very rich. I've had the privilege of being able to read the translations, especially, yes, Shukumar Ray, Satyajit Ray. A lot of these have really enriched my journey as a children's book writer and editor. Yeah. So, okay. You know, I very much believe that we're all made up of stories. Okay, my voice is made up of stories. You know, try this with headphones if it's better. So I very much believe that we're all made up of stories. If you step back into the cave paintings, what were they? They were really stories that were being told. My voice was echoing to only to me. Hello.
Yes, Bijal, it's better now.
It is. Thank you so much. Yeah, I was talking about the fact that I remember when I visited Bhimbetka in Madhya Pradesh, and I don't know how many of you have been there. I think I was just taken back by the kind of stories that were being told on the cave walls over there. And it made me realize that there's that one similarity between early man and woman and us, is that we're constantly telling stories. And as children's book writers and illustrators and editors, that's exactly what we do. Um, so I'm going to share one of my favorite quotes about a book from a book that's been written by my friend. Just a second. Yes. Um, okay, it's from this book called A Book for Puchku. It's written by the Panjana Pal and Rajiv Ipe, and it's been published by Pratham Books, where I work. And her friend Puchku loves books, and her friends are like, "Come on out, let's go and play. And why are you always reading?" And Puchku says, "But books are so much fun. Look, you see a circle and the straight line, push it in, pull that out, and it becomes a letter. Line up the letters, you have a word. Words can be wise, words can be funny, words can be sad, and words can be sunny. When you put words together, they make sentences, and sentences become stories. Read it, and whoosh, you are in another world." So to me, that's exactly what children's books really have done. They've been a source of escape, a source of delight. And so I'm going to step into a little bit of history of children's books. And this is a recent history. I'm not going to go into like the start of the moral tales which define children's books. But I'm going to step back to 20 years ago. That's the year 2000. The New York Times Book Review printed an announcement that created waves in the publishing industry for us. For the first time ever, the newspaper planned to print a separate bestseller list for children's books. And the editors wrote explaining this, saying, "The change is largely in response to the expected demand for the fourth in the Harry Potter series of children's books. The 7-book series by British author J.K. Rowling spent 10 years ruling the bestseller list. As Salon put it, it takes a wizard to change the course of the times." Now, recent controversy aside, which we're not going to get into for this, but I don't know how many of you have had the privilege of being the Harry Potter generation who grew up reading Harry Potter. I only got to read Harry Potter when I was in college. And at that point, nobody was reading children's books. Everybody read your Jeffrey Archers and literary fiction. And I actually had to lie to my classmates and my family saying that Harry Potter was an assignment set by our creative writing professor. And what happened with this book series is that it fostered this new generation of children and adult readers. Like there was a surge in sale in books, there was an increase in the number of books being published for younger audiences, and suddenly at the turn of the new millennium, book publishing for children became serious business. So, of course, India also was not alienated from this boom. But that's the story of the 2000s. When I grew up, and many of you who are in my age demographic, you must have grown up reading books by British authors such as Enid Blyton, American books such as the Nancy Drew case series, Hardy Boys, and Russian picture books, so many Russian picture books that made their way to us. So now my question to you is, and I'd like you to answer in the comments box, is what do you think books and reading have done to you personally? You're all English department students and professors, so I'd really love to know what do you see books and reading have done to you as a person? Okay, so Yes. Payal says entertainment and escapism simultaneously. Sanjay says opens up many different worlds. Yes, and Parul echoes that, opens windows of different cultures and ideas. Um, Imagination, very, very true. Dhwani, hi Dhwani. World of imagination, Dr. Khan says opens windows. It enables you to look at things differently, molded our sensibilities, made us feel literate. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of amazing, right? To think that this is um, what something this tiny does for all of us. Like, I know that in the lockdown, and I don't know how many of you have been facing the same thing. In the first month of the lockdown, I could not read at all. And to me, the idea of not being able to read was like not being able to breathe. And so I did what I do when I can't read. I turned to picture books. And that really helped me. So now let's get into uh, books and environment. Just a second, going back to the presentation. Okay. I think, and your answers basically echo what studies show, that books play a significant role in shaping children's perceptions, values, and attitudes. And I know it did for me. And if you talk to a lot of authors, especially nature writers, I've interviewed Mr. Ruskin Bond, I've interviewed different authors and illustrators, and a lot of them go back to their childhood nature reading for having influenced them to become the people they are. And in fact, it's not only uh, what do you say? It's not only like the books of now. Even Enid Blyton, for instance, had a profound impression on a generation of children who grew up reading about children who were close to nature. I mean, famous 5 series. Yeah, they got to go camping on private islands. They went for long nature rambles across the moors for summer hauls. That's the Find Outer series. They also spent time learning about animals in the woods. Um, and I remember in her circus series, Blyton actually condemned the use of wild animals such as lions and tigers in for entertainment. So, in some ways, so what if we did not know what scones and ginger ale tasted like? We actually, for me, a lot of my nature impressions came from these first books I read. And studies actually underscored this. In 2014, there was a study published, The Greatest Magic of Harry Potter, Reducing Prejudice. It basically revealed that evidence shows that supports the effect of reading the books of Harry Potter in relationship with refugees among university students, as well as support for the mediating role of perspective taking and for the moderating role of identification with the negative character. Um, Jargon aside, it basically meant that the books were positively associated with perspectives towards refugees, as well as towards LGBT communities. And the thing is that books have always had themes of magic realism, adventure, mystery. But nature and environment has pretty much been a mainstay as well. Think about Winnie the Pooh. I mean, they lived in the forest. They were all animals except for Chris. And so many of us grew up reading those books. And there's now a general scientific consensus that children who are introduced to nature at a young age grow up to be compassionate adults. And I actually find Hennigan somebody very interesting. He's a professor at the DePaul University, and he's also written this book called Beasts at Bedtime. And he offers a seminar called The Ecology of Childhood, and his book is basically based on that. And he basically emphasizes the role of children's book towards teaching children about the natural world. So to quote him from Beasts at Bedtime, talking lions, philosophical bears, very hungry caterpillars, wise spiders, altruistic trees, companionable moles, urbane elephants. This is the magnificent menagerie that delights our children at bedtime. Within the entertaining pages of many children's books, however, lie profound teachings about the natural world that can help children develop an educated and engaged appreciation of the dynamic environment they inhabit. So one of the things that Liam also says, which I find very fascinating, and I completely agree, and we'll talk about it a little bit more, is that when you are taking something as precious as the environment and something as carefree as nature, you cannot turn it into a pedagogical exercise, because then it's going to become like, अच्छा बच्चों अभी हमने famous five के बारे में पढ़ा, we read about famous five, and now let's talk about island habitat. It's going to turn off children from enjoying the book. Also, you can't always be gloomy is something that he says. And I completely agree with him on this. Which brings me to a slightly narrower subject within environment fiction, environment narratives in children's books, climate change. And author Amitav Ghosh, when he published his book, The Great Derangement, which I'm sure many of you have read, he asked a very important question. He said, where is the fiction about climate change? And I quote from his article in The Guardian, where he says, the climate crisis casts a much smaller shadow on literary fiction than it does on the world. We're living through a crisis of culture and of imagination. So that makes me really question that how do we talk climate in literature? So the fact is that internationally there are tons of books on climate change, and I go to schools very often. I travel across India when we could travel, and I speak to children across different parts of India. So I speak to them in Bangalore, I've gone to Jodhpur, I've gone to Calcutta, I've gone to Mumbai, and I find the answers really fascinating, because I start my conversation on my books by asking them what do they know about climate change. And to my utter surprise, like, I've realized that there are three groups that I can divide the children in. There's one who is slightly indifferent. They're like, okay, new speaker, whatever. The second group are children who are deeply invested in environment. Like, they are so bright, they can actually co-write these books with some of us. They'll have trivia at their fingertips. They are concerned. They are signing petitions. They are Indian Greta Thunberg, that Aman Sharma. And then there's the third group, which really petrified me. I was in Jodhpur, and this was at an international school. And I was talking about my book. And so I asked them, tell me, what do you know about climate change? And this was a group of children who were getting the best education possible in Jodhpur. And there was silence, deafening silence. And I was like, okay, I don't know how, okay, have you heard of global warming? No. Do you want to take a guess? Yes, ma'am, the climate. So then they'll all get into the daily weather patterns that are changing. So then I start asking them to connect the dots, where I'm like, how was your summer in Jodhpur? Was it hotter? It's winter time, none of us are wearing sweaters. Has this been the usual case? And suddenly their eyes spark up and they have questions and they want to know more. Why is this happening? So I just find that this is where I can't help but agree with Mr. Ghosh that even children's literature has failed children. We have to make sure that children know, but when they know, it shouldn't be like, you have to save the world. No, they don't. They have homework to do. Children have lots of other things to do. And every time I speak to a scientist, they always tell me how ashamed they feel that a 17-year-old girl is leading the climate crisis, the climate campaign. I'm going to take you through. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through some of my favorite books as well. Oh yeah, but let me just one more thing before that. Okay. Um, there was this Guardian Books podcast where I was listening to Sarah Crown, and she said that there aren't that many children's books about climate change as you would expect. Given it's perhaps right now, apart from the pandemic, it's perhaps one of the biggest issues of this world. And we are just seeing that literature has failed this. And I would say Indian literature has failed it even more. I can count on my fingers how many climate books for children there are, and for adults also. Let's not give them a pass over here. And the fact is that this is important because more and more children are living away from nature. And some of them don't even have the chance to pet a dog. To them, the idea of greenery is a park. They've not been to a forest. So it's books about the natural world that actually can introduce them and instill curiosity about the environment in them. And there's this author, Richard Love, who wrote Last Child in the Woods. And he talks about this nature isolation hypothesis. And he says the author directly links the lack of nature in the lives of today's wired generation. And he calls it nature deficit disorder. It's a very fascinating read because he basically says that the children and nature movement is fueled by this fundamental idea: the child in nature is an endangered species, and the health of children and the health of the earth are inseparable. So I'm going to first just explain to you that children's books are divided into broadly 3 categories. The first category is picture books. This is for very young children who are beginning to read, and these books have a lot of illustrations and very minimal text. And it's one of their first introductions to the reading word. And as somebody said, it made them a literate person, and picture books is a great stepping stone for literacy. Then there is middle grade books, and this is my middle grade non-fiction book, and this is Mr. Ranjit Lal. So these are for teenagers, so this is 8 to 12 age group. And then you have young adult, which is for teenagers who basically are very, very difficult to please. Take it from me. And picture books are typically where you find most environment stories, but even that is reducing. There was this research done on 196 books that received this very prestigious award. It's called the Caldecott, between 1938 and 2008. And they basically studied all the picture books that had won an award to understand what was the kind of nature depiction in that. And they found that there have been significant decline in depictions of natural environments and animals, while built environments have become much more common. One of the most disturbing findings of the study was the disappearance of wild animals from the books and the appearance of a constructed environment. And to me, I just cannot imagine something like this happening. But there is further evidence of it and this was something which I read because of a nature author. His name is Robert Macfarlane, and he, in the introduction of his book, wrote that when in 2007, when Oxford released the new edition of their junior dictionary, they realized that words about nature were gone. So like simple words, moss, blackberry, bluebell were gone. And they were actually being replaced by technology words, blog, chat room, MP3. And then later on, the next edition had even more such cuts. And it meant that we were losing nature lexicon as well. So if can I ask somebody to make my screen the central one, because it's a little distracting with so many other videos popping up. Okay, so I'm going to show you my literally one of my favorite books. Um, Prompted by this, Robert Macfarlane and Jackie Morris created this magnificent book. It's called The Lost Words. And the back says, once upon a time, words began to vanish from the language of children. They disappeared so quickly that at first almost no one noticed, until one day they were gone. But there's an old kind of magic for finding what is missing and for summoning what has vanished. If the right spells are spoken, the lost words might return. And what Robert and Jackie have done is that this book is full of these beautiful illustrations and poems, which he calls spells. And I'm going to read you from a kingfisher. I'm guessing that kingfisher is a fairly common bird for everyone. And if not here, if you want to see what it looks like, it's a magnificent bird, and that's the kingfisher. And I'll just read 2-3 lines from there. Kingfisher, the color giver, fire bringer, flame flicker, reverse quiver, ink black bill, orange throat, and a quick blue black gleaming feather stream. Neat, and still it sits on the snag of a stick, until with gold flare, wing fan, whip crack, the kingfisher, zingfisher, singfisher, flashes down too fast to follow, quick and quicker carves its hollow. So it's genuinely one of the most beautiful books about nature. And I think books like these go a very long way in introducing children to the sense of wonder that nature has, because I strongly believe, and research also shows, that if children are not taught about nature, then they basically do not respect it. And it's books like these that really do that. Another favorite book of mine is Home. It's by Barrow. And it actually tackles 2 very crucial issues when it comes to climate change. One is the phenomena of global warming itself and endangered species. And the second is the whole issue of climate refugees. And basically, it's about a family of polar bears who, are very peaceful and chilling. And one day, crack, they find themselves drifting on into the ocean, and they are set to find a new home. And they go to different islands, and all of the denizens turn them away, until finally they find a home, of course. And this is the story, and it uses minimal text. It has lots of beautiful images to talk about something as powerful as climate refugees. I think one of the books that does climate change very well is The Trouble with Dragons. It's written and illustrated by Debbie Guillory. And she uses dragons as a metaphor for human beings. And she says the trouble with dragons is dragon makes dragons, and they make some more till there are wall-to-wall dragons making dragons galore. As you can see, Malthusian theory has popped in. And then she talks about how dragons are taking over the spaces and eating all the food, and they are throwing parties and making a mess, and they blow out hot air. And it's such a fantastic way of introducing a child to something as complex as climate change. There are books that I don't think do very well, but can we help? Yes, you can. So it's basically different ways of helping in the community. Um, and then there are there are biographies about nature defenders, which always is really interesting to read. And I've come to realize that children really, really like um, biographies, which I guess shouldn't be surprising. So one of the things that I would say is that writing for children can be very tricky, and authors have to tread this fine balance between talking to an audience that's of a different age group. But we were all children once, so you can do it. And so you have to make sure that you don't talk down to them and you're not sanctimonious. And you're not didactic and boring. Because the whole thing that, I mean, right now also as an adult, if someone tells you, but you have to segregate your garbage, you are not going to do it until there's a fine that your society imposes on you. Children are the same. The moment you preach through them, they switch off. So you have to make sure you entertain and educate at the same time. Of course, in India, we love educational books, but abroad, there's also a lot of criticism about books that give lectures and give messages that are terrifying or dismal. Now, I'm going to ask you to, I'm going to do a true or false quiz for you all. You've got to type, I'm going to tell you some basics about children's books, and you're going to type in the chat box whether it's true or false. And this, please, this is a personal thought, not, don't treat this as work. So the first question for you is, so if you could write one true or false. So one, slapstick comedy is essential for children. I don't think I can see chat. Can I? Yes, I can. All right, we have mixed answers coming in. False, false, true, true. Okay. So very interestingly, I find that when this is a mixed thing. A lot of people think slapstick comedy works with children, and it does at many levels. But children get also subtle comedy. They don't always need a man walking, slipping on a banana peel and going dharam. You know, that's great. It's ha ha he he at that point. But children also get subtlety very well. Next question. Moral stories are good. True, 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 true. Okay. Somebody give Sanjay an award because he was right. False. Moral stories bad. We don't turn to books, children to books for morals as adults. We are not reading Amitav Ghosh, or we are not reading Charles Dickens anymore for morals. We're reading them for pure escapism, for entertainment. So children's books also are not about morals. They are about the joy of reading. Third, a picture is worth 1,000 words. True or false? Yes, absolutely. I do like definitely in picture books especially, and I'm going to show you one of my favorite books. I don't know if, I'm hoping you all can see this. It's called Do Is Tak, which is basically insect gibberish speak, and the whole book is only gibberish, and it goes into the life cycle of a plant with all insects talking to each other, and they say things like iki ru baba rubel ribble ru dadin dudin furt. So it's full gibberish, but children have a blast reading this book. It's created by one of our best picture book authors, illustrators. Her name is Carson Ellis, and it talks about the different stages of a plant and insect life. But so in this case, for me, a picture is worth 1,000 words for sure. You try taking that to a teenager and they'll be like, I don't read it. So it also depends on the audience for sure that what do they think. The fourth question, books should give equal space to both genders and challenge stereotypes. True or false? Lots of truths coming in. It's very true. We do need to make sure that there's enough space for all genders. We have fiction in India that's increasingly giving more space to angry girls, to girls who get the space to say things, to boys who can be unboy boys, who are not typical boys. They're showing mixed families. So I think that children's books do need to make sure that they're representing their readers in the truest form. Children's book. Next question: children's books must teach something to the young reader. True or false? Okay, yes. So I think that all good fiction actually and non-fiction, whether it's for children or for adults, has values. It would not necessarily teach something, as Raiba says, it's not necessary. It doesn't have to teach, and it shouldn't, because the moment you teach, especially to a child, they're getting taught from 9 to 3:30, they know they're being taught to. So the most important thing for them is really, for all of us, is to find some values. But hey, every time I go to a classroom, I realize that Gajapati Kulapati by Ashok Rajgopalan, which is about an elephant sneezing, is the most popular book. And with good reason, I love Gajapati Kulapati. And Henna says something really true. Literature doesn't aim to teach but delight, and that's pretty much it. The second last question, when writing for children, it's important to know how to dumb down a complicated subject for young minds. True or false? Sure. When writing for children, it's important to know how to dumb down a complicated subject for young minds. Yes, dumb down, that was exactly what I wrote. And I'm glad you caught that. That was a trick question. Author illustrator Maurice Sendak used to say something very important. He said, I don't write for children, I write. And I think that all of us do that. We write. And we find a space. It's for children, it's for adults. You cannot dumb down anything for children. They're very smart. And those of you, exactly, they have their own intellect. And those of you who actually work with children or have children know that you cannot dupe a child. They will know completely when you are talking down to them, when you're dumbing down to them. So how you explain a difficult subject like climate change is not like, try and think of yourself as, when you talk to a child, do you talk while standing and looking down, or will you sit down next to the child and talk face to face? As an author, that's what you try and do. You sit down and you talk face to face. So you step into the shoes of a child, and that's when a child will listen. Last question, true or false? Gloom and doom, no thank you. Stories of drought, of land being stolen, of climate change, disasters. Absolutely, yes. Children are actually surprisingly resilient. Have you ever talked, like I have talked to, when I do writing workshop for children, by the end of it, no, you cannot have only happiness. That's so true. Because so when I do writing workshops for children, it's great fun, because by the end of their stories, everyone's dead in their book, in their little story. Everyone. They all were walking and dharam, they all died. They all were sitting in school, something happened, they all died. So children actually are very resilient and they're very curious about these things. And books become a way of navigating these emotions. It's now a specific branch. It's called social and emotional learning. And it actually helps them navigate complicated emotions, to grapple with death of a dear one, to understand divorce. These are things that books can actually do. Like one of my favorite examples is in the book Percy Jackson and the Battle of the Labyrinth by Rick Riordan. This satire goes to look for Pan, the lost god of wilderness, and he finds the god, and Pan is dying because the natural world is dying and is causing him to fade away. And that is a very, very sad thing. But when he dies, Pan passes on his energy to Grover and his friends, giving them the task of saving the natural world and wildlife. And so this is what really books do. They give you this window into a very scary world, but it also helps you make sense of them. And very quickly, I'll take you through some of my favorite Indian authors now, because we've spoken a lot about the international ones. This is Ranjit Lal. Anything Ranjit Lal writes, please read. He writes beautifully about animals. He writes beautifully about the natural world and the problems they are facing. This book, The Tigers of Taboo Valley, Ranjit Lal actually writes about poaching. He writes about the vultures that got endangered in Jamnagar because of the use of pesticide. And the pesticide was called diclofenac. So there are two vultures in this called diclo and feniac. So yes, he's the same one who writes a column for Indian Express. And anything Ranjit Lal writes about environment, I would say please read, because he writes it in such a delightful way. Another very important book, this is a young adult book. It's by Siddhartha Sharma. It's called Year of the Weeds. And Siddhartha used to be a journalist, and now he's a children's book author. And this story is based on the landmark ruling where the Odisha tribals won against Vedanta when it came to mining their sacred hills of Niyamgiri. And so this is a fictional take of that, but it's beautiful, it's searing, and it's also very funny in parts, because there's a politician, there's the media, all of that in this book. Going a little further to history, M. Krishnan used to be a naturalist, a writer, and an artist. He's written many, many books, but this is his book for children, which was published posthumously by Duckbill. It's called Book of Peace, an A to Z of rhyming bestiary, and it talks about endangered animals. So these are our heroes. Now, I can see that we're almost out of time in terms of the talk. So I'm going to quickly tell you that some of the issues that environmental writing in India faces. One is that if you go to mainstream bookstores, you will not find these books. Even though Siddhartha's book was nominated for the Crossword Book Award along with mine, you will just not find these, because you will see they mostly have international books. Their bestseller list is always mythology, folk tales, and they'll always have Ruskin Bond, Sudha Murthy, and my friend Rupa Pai, which is a good thing. But Rupa Pai's writing of Gita and Upanishads rather than her writing on economics and so on. So what happens then is that when you have such select visibility of books, you are contributing to a homogeneity of ideas, attitudes, and beliefs. I mean, in a country where Hindu mythology rules by best-selling lists, it's not surprising that environmental books are not getting published or not even getting read after they are being published. It is quite a struggle, The moment you ask nature writing, everybody says Ruskin Bond. But there are many more writers to explore out there. And Ruskin Bond is an inspiration for all of us. Let me please put that on record. What I'm going to do is, Dr. Vaishnav, Mr. Mukherjee, Dwani, do I have 5 minutes to do a reading? Okay. So this is my book. It's a climate fiction, and it's for young adults. It's for teenagers. It's called A Cloud Called Bhura, Climate Champions to the Rescue. It's published by Talking Cub, and it's illustrated by my friend. Their name is Oindri. And this book is basically based on something that happened in real life. I was studying climate change in Costa Rica, and I came across the brown cloud phenomenon. And it's basically, if you Google it, it shows the accumulation of polluted clouds over the southern part of the world. And we've studied about how it would impact monsoon patterns in India. It would impact agriculture. It would impact heart and lung diseases, basically. And a politician in India basically said that it was propaganda from the West. And I was kind of like, okay, I want to write a story about, because to me, climate change is not just about the environment. It's also about, the way people view climate change. And I wanted children to also get a look at that. So this book is about 4 friends. It's about Amni, Mithil, Tammy, and Andrew. They live in Mumbai because, hey, I lived in Mumbai, okay? So that's why. And they wake up one morning and they find that something has changed. So I'm going to ask you very quickly, tell me in your chat box, when you look outside your window, what do you see? Sky, buildings, trees and birds, sparrows, clouds, open sky, greenery. You all are so lucky. Every time I talk to city kids, they are like cars, pollution, masks. So that's the answers I get. So on most days, Amni could see the following from the 21st floor window of their building in Glen Meadows Society. 1. Mrs. Daruwala's apartment. 2. A colorful line of Mrs. Daruwala and family's clothes hanging out to dry. 3. Pigeons roosting and pooping on the parapet. 4. A mango tree with no mangoes on it. 5. A piece of the sky. But today, Amni couldn't see anything. Correction, all she could see was a thick haze. Everything was grayish-brown, like an overcast monsoon day. There was no sky. There was no sun. A brown cloud lowered in the sky, whirling like a top. In her lifespan of 12 years, 9 months, and 10 days, Amni had never seen a cloud quite like this one. It was also the biggest thing she had ever seen, and Amni lived in a city crammed with tall skyscrapers and long bridges. Outside her window, it was as though the world had turned upside down and a turbulent, toxic ocean hovered above them. The cloud was a swirling mass of sooty grays, muddy browns, burnt yellows, gases that collided violently and restlessly into each other. And so now when you can't look up, you look down. So Amni looks down and she sees that the neighbors are all standing down and pointing up. Ghosh uncle is bent over his phone and trying to take a selfie with the brown cloud in the background. What is that? Amni whispered. I have no clue, Ma said. Is it an eclipse, you think? Really? An eclipse? When was the last time you saw an eclipse that looked like a fat UFO cloud squatting on top of us? Sometimes adults made no sense. So now, when adults don't understand things, we do 2 things. We go online and check, or we switch on the television. So now they switch on the television. A special edition of Khabar Bhayankar, the most popular news show on TV, was on. Vaturiya Bauche was shouting into his microphone. Amni had always thought the newscaster resembled a hyperactive crow with a slick-backed black charcoal-colored hair, shiny black suit. Today, he was like a hyperactive crow on 15 cups of coffee. This cloud, it's the brownest cloud you've ever seen. Climate scientists are pouring in from all over the world to study this unusual cloud that's hovering above our city. My question to you, mysterious brown cloud, is why are you here? There was no response. So basically, if you see what I've done in this book is I have put in popular references. Everybody recognizes Vatorio. There are scientists, there are iPads, there are phones. There are little points that the children recognize in that. What happens is that I'm going to skip to the point where he meets the scientists while shooting, and he goes up to them and says, "Ma'am, my question to you is," they ignored him. Taken aback, he swiveled his mic to another scientist, but at the sight of the scientist, the journalist jumped back in alarm. The second scientist looked exactly like the first. Same grey streaked hair, same raptor beak nose, same spectacles. "We are twins," the second scientist said with a grin. "I'm Dr. Vidisha Mehta, and this is my sister, Dr. Vidisha Mehta. What my sister and I are trying to do today is to measure the cloud shadow to get a sense of its size." "Right," Vaturio Bauche replied. "So, Dr. Mehta, what is this brown cloud, and why has it chosen an Indian city and not New York to hover around?" "New York?" Vidisha stopped in her tracks, frowning at the strange question. She glanced at her sister, who shrugged. "Yes," said Vaturio Bauche. "If you see Hollywood films, you know that all aliens, beasts, and monsters pick New York as the location for disastrous events. Is it not unusual then that this particular cloud chose our Indian city? Is it a sign of our economic progress?" Vidisha looked like she was going to say something scientific and sarcastic, but Vidisha stepped in front of the mic and said smoothly, "We are scientists and not filmmakers. I'm afraid we can't comment right now." No, Dr. Mehta and Dr. Mehta, my question to you, what is this cloud and why is it here?" Vidisha finally had a question she could answer. She takes the mic and says, "We are still investigating, but it is our researchers that this cloud is not of the regular precipitous type. Our hypothesis right now is that this is either an organic or non-organic body that is blocking the crepuscular rays as well as the anticrepuscular rays of the sun. Satellite imageries are being examined to corroborate this hypothesis." That's how academics talk. Vaturio Bauche is struggling to keep up, and so Vidisha steps in and says, "Let me explain. As you can see, it is darker than normal." Vaturio Bauche didn't need any more. He snatched the mic from Vidisha and yelled, "So India, I can confirm to you at this very moment, yes India, it's breaking now on Khabar Bhayankar. I can confirm to you what you're seeing today is a darker day. A brown cloud of darkness has finally descended upon our financial capital. Scientists are also in the dark. But I ask you, India, what do you think it is? Tweet us your answers. We are waiting to hear from you. Use the hashtag #BuraCloudus. Who are you?" So that's how I try to write a climate fiction. Thank you for listening to me so patiently about this. I'm going to end with two of my favorite people. Rachel Carson is my hero. And one of the things that she said, I believe very strongly, is that if a child is to keep alive her inborn sense of wonder, she needs the companionship of at least one adult who can share it, rediscovering with her the joy, excitement, and mystery of the world we live in. And to me, as a children's book author as well as editor, I think books are the same thing. And last, from my favorite book, The Lorax, Dr. Seuss, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. Thank you so much. Questions? Let me know if you have any questions. I know there was some in the middle that somebody said, will the titles be available? Oh, there are questions. Should the children be made aware of the harsh repercussions humans face due to environmental destruction, or does that become insensitive for children's literature? That's a great question, Mrinalini. Um, I actually think that children should know, children care. Greta Thunberg is a great example of this. She was 16 when she decided to stand outside the Swedish parliament and protest about climate destruction. And I constantly meet children who have learnt about tiger poaching, who've heard about animals in captivity, and they've decided to actually take action. So I think it's important to talk about this with children through literature, but I also think it's important that you leave them with a message of hope, because it's really unfair to burden their little shoulders with this whole paradigm of, oh my god, the world's ending. It's not. The world, earth is going to be fine. It's human beings who are in trouble. So I think message of hope along with reality checks are very important. Sure, Sanjay, please. I'm told you and Anushka are friends.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I read one of your books. It's called "What's Nima Eating Today." It was yeah, this one. It was a school assignment my teacher gave.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So I didn't know about it at first, but when I read it, I really liked it, and I want to read more of your books because they really are. I really can understand, and I can sometimes relate to it too, because whatever you choose, I like the idea of what's Nima eating today, because I'm mostly like Nima. I like to try different food, and I like to eat with season. It's not like I like eating mango in the winter, but I do like to eat with season. And I have one question which for you, which is that so when you're writing some book, how do you come up with the idea that I want to write this book, or this is gonna be the plot? Or even when you have a plot, is it really hard to connect the subtopics and the main topic of the book, or is it really easy, like dot dot, you know?
My God, what's your name?
Kea.
Kea, that's a great question. Firstly, I don't think adults ask me such insightful questions. Firstly, thank you for reading Nima. I will tell Priya, who illustrated the book, that you liked it and that you eat with the season. You are a climate champion, Kea. Where do I get my ideas from? So I have I like to observe. I'm one of those people who, on the train is listening to other people's conversations. In the classrooms, I'll be sitting and looking at my classmate and saying, what is that person doing? Or just looking out of my window and observing the clouds roll in and all of that. So I think one of the main things to be able to come up with ideas is to you need to become Sherlock Holmes for writing. You need to have keen observational skills, and you can do that. Like when you see something happening, write it down. Always carry a small notebook with you and pen, because a notebook's useless without a pen. And write it down. And I can tell you one thing, my family has stopped talking to me about things that happen because they're very scared I'll put them into books, which I have done. So borrow from your friends and family. As a writer, you're allowed to do all of that. It's not called stealing then, it's just called borrowing. So listen to people, ask them questions, and because I used to be a journalist, I am very used to asking people questions. And about plot, I do find it hard. When I wrote Bhura, I found it very hard to end this book. I sat on it for 6 years because I couldn't find an ending, because how do you solve climate change? I didn't know. And I found the answer through a bit of news. And so, again, like I keep saying, listen, ask questions, be curious, and you'll find yourself becoming a writer. And listening to you, Kea, I feel like we're going to have one more writer called Kea Mukherjee.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kea.
What you said was, I really liked it because even I relate to something, which is that when someone's talking, I really like to listen. It's like when I'm in a like in a class, or I have some people around me talking, um, and I'm free. I really like to do nothing but give no one the idea that I'm actually listening to them. I'm not like spying on them, but I do listen to them because I'm really curious of what are they talking about.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So we've all got to be that lizard on the wall who's just.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kea.
Bijal ma'am,
Yes.
there is a question by Professor Sarni Ghoshal that she wants to know if, like, should there be violence in the books, comic books?
Oh. So I think violence is very much intrinsic to children in many ways. If you see, children do tend to, they will stomp on things, on ants. They will put a magnifying glass and an ant to see it burn. So it's not like they're shielded from violence. Plus, you have television on continuously. I have a friend who lives in Kashmir, and he was telling me how he didn't realize that his 4-year-old daughter knew what pellets are because the TV used to be on in the house. So the children do observe, but I think it comes down to the age appropriateness of the comics, as to what sort of violence it's depicting. If it's too graphic, then it's definitely not for young children. And this is why we always say that parents and educators and librarians need to be involved in reading along with children. So you can also help them become. You can be the help become discerning readers in that sense. And also, if there is violence and it's disturbing, have a conversation with your little reader about it so that they're not always disturbed about by it. But you'd be surprised as to how much children, like Tom and Jerry, man, like I have never understood. Um, like I mean, I enjoyed it as a child, but it's really violent, and so it's there. But I would say figure out discretion according to your child's reading age group.
Another question is, like, there is a person who wants to know if we can get a list of the titles, all the titles you mentioned. We have been trying to note them down, but we couldn't make an exhaustive list. So if you could circulate it somewhere, we will post it
I will
to
do
our.
so. I will send it to my rock star cousin Dhwani.
Yeah, she can circulate it to all of us. Next question is, do you think the recent pandemic would lead to a new surge in children's literature pertaining to environment?
Right now the publishing industry is actually struggling to survive. We haven't had any sales for a whole quarter across the world because bookstores have been shut, our warehouses have been shut. So the only sales that we've actually seen is of ebooks. So we are going to first be struggling to just come back to a point where we'll be economically stable. But I certainly hope that there will be more books on the environment. I know internationally there's something called the Greta Thunberg trend, which has led to a lot of international publishing houses commissioning more books on climate change. But in India, we're much slower about this. What I suspect will happen, there will be a lot more books about health and hygiene. Remember that point about morals and children's
Yeah.
books? You are going to see a lot of that. Wash your hands and all of that.
Thank you. One more question by Professor Sanjay Mukherjee. What are your thoughts on the visibility of children, Greta notwithstanding, in the world of adults?
You mean children should be seen and not heard? Uh, no, that
No,
was a
not
joke.
like that.
No,
Like,
that
you
was
know.
joking. So, I think that now more so than ever, a lot of children's, the visibility of childhood in that sense has got hidden. We're always trying to do good by our children, especially as parents, but I find a lot more, especially when we're talking about privileged middle class audiences, you realize that there's a lot more passing the buck to a gadget, to outsourcing the help to a help and so on, and you're not always listening to your child. And that said, there's also a counter movement where I find that there are parents who are very, very engaged with the children and educators who are also. But I think that adults find it very hard to take children seriously until you have somebody like Greta who's actually stood up and said, "You've got to listen to me because I'm not going to go to school otherwise." And not everybody has the agency that Greta has. Um, so adults find it very easy to dismiss children until they're doing work for them, and then they don't actually ask them what they want.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it has been a wonderful session. We started around 5, quite right on time. Technology has supported us, more or less.
Yes.
It's clouding over right now here in Rajkot with a strong breeze blowing. But this first session, remembering our mentor, our teacher, Professor Avadhesh Kumar Singh, by the Alumni Association, I would say, I being the accidental president of this association right now, and like presidents of all institutions, I don't have to do much. My team is great. My team is wonderful. And I take this opportunity to thank Team Alumni, Saurashtra University Department of English. It's been really wonderful. The way you read, I've been reading comments. It's so easy, so spontaneous. I'm sure you've been able to connect with children. Kea, my daughter, has been listening to you. She's just gone off now because her neighbor has come to call her. But Kea has been listening to you throughout the past hour, and so yeah. So children, I think you connect very well with children. Children's literature also is something which we don't teach academically. So something which is not in the canons of English literature, probably, yeah. And that is where Professor Avadhesh Kumar Singh, and he sensitized all of us in the Department of English at Saurashtra University to widen this thing called canon, to bring in memoirs, to bring in travel writing. Your cousin Dhwani has done her PhD on travel writing, by the way. To bring the diaries, to bring letters, and such other marginal little narratives, and by which we expand. But I think listening to you today, we will also have to pay quite a bit of attention on children's literature. We have people working for their PhD on young adult fiction, though I must tell you, I must hasten to add that. But yes, children's literature and these beautifully illustrated books. That's why I was talking to you about visibility. Even in the Kolkata Book Bazaar, I have not seen the visibility of these such books that you mentioned. So that is why I was also a little concerned about visibility. I think words are not enough to thank you, Bijal. And in the process of being in communicating with you, I came to realize that we have a common friend, Anushka, and so this world is such a nice circle, and probably we'll invite her someday, and we'll ask her, we'll convince her also.
Anushka is one of the best children's book writers in the world.
Yes, and you know what? I have known her when she was developing as a writer, so it's such a great feeling. Yeah, so we were doing theater together in Baroda, MS
He said.
University. Yes. Well, and I see that we have sustained. We went up to 71, 72 people. We are still around 50 people. That's the interested group. That is always the interested group. We would have a handful of people. We know in the classroom, a class of 60, we are actually teaching to between 6 and 10 students actually. So we have got a very dedicated kind of an audience. And we would like to have your postal address, if you can pass it on to Dhwani, and a small envelope of our publications would reach you as a token of our gratitude. These are books which are absolutely not illustrated, very boring, very academic, and so you can put it away somewhere in some corner of your beautiful book rack. Thank you very much, Bijal. Thank you, all of you. It is coming to be 6:30. It's coming to be a weekend evening 6:30. So I seek permission from all, including my alumni hosts, to sign off now. If there is no very interesting questions left.
Thank you so much. This was I've actually
Ma'am,
never really
sorry.
done a section at in Gujarat, so for me this was quite a big deal because that's where I was born. And so thank you, Dhwani, for suggesting this. I think it's amazing.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think Dr. Vaishnav was trying
Vaishnav was saying something. Yes, please.
Actually, ma'am, if you don't mind, there is one person who is still hanging around with his question, and
Sure.
Oh, please.
he is so
Please.
much
Yeah.
curious. So I'll just ask on his behalf. He says Imran, one of our team members. So he is very much involved in all this arrangement. So he couldn't ask in between.
And he writes good poems too.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
So he asks, besides children literature, we have cartoon series which is more closer, majority of kids compared to books. Besides children literature, we have cartoon series which is more closer to kids compared to books. He probably is trying to connect with the comics, visual and digital medium, print and
If
digital.
I can interrupt, hello,
Yeah, please.
With sir's permission. Sorry, I was a little bit away for my prayer time, so I couldn't ask the question. Actually, this question came to my mind since my daughter, Soha, and all other kids, as we all know, they are quite involved with watching cartoons. And long
Kota
back,
Bheem.
yeah, I had also seen one cartoon series, Delhi Safari. And by listening ma'am's lecture, that immediately came to my mind that how in Delhi Safari we see animals and they are playing different roles. And we have a monkey and then a bear, etc. Well, the question is that in reality, we all know that animals are not so the way cartoon series show to the kids. And that in fact affects quite differently to the kids' mind. How psychologically this issue can be looked at, because kids' mind is quite tender, and as we all know that it's like a blank slate. So I keep my question incomplete, and it's all to you, ma'am. Thank you.
That's actually a question, Dr. Khan, that has a lot of educators thinking about. I know Montessori, for instance, does not allow children until they're the age of 7 or something to see animals being anthropomorphized, because they don't want to get children confused about talking animals and animated series and all of that. And I see the point of that, because they want children to appreciate these animals as they are. I have co-written this book with my friend Rohan, and it's basically got comics which are set in Indian forests.
Okay.
So there's no talking animal in it, but you end up seeing a lot of animals and learning about habitats. And we find that children
Yes.
react very beautifully to that as well. That said, I grew up watching Bambi and uh, Jungle Jungle Phool Khila Hai. So,
Yes. Indeed.
uh, and I think I've always, I I know that Bambi has a special place in my heart for many reasons. And I think that so it depends on which school of thought you align with. As an educator, as a parent, if you think that these cartoons at this age are not appropriate for a child, anyway, screen time needs to be is usually regulated for that age group. So I think there are enough different thoughts about how they impact children. And I personally believe when I'm editing a book that when you are giving an animal a voice, you need to stay true to that animal. Otherwise, I wouldn't publish that story. Um, to me, that's very important. Firstly, I don't always publish books which have animals talking. The few times I have, they lend themselves to STEM when I'm doing STEM education, I try not to have animals talking. When I'm doing fiction, I'm happy to take that leap of imagination with my authors and illustrators, but they have to be in the characteristics of the animal and in the right habitat. So you will not find gorillas in Amazon, which somebody had sent me a manuscript about, don't ask. But they need to stay true to natural history characteristics according to me. And once you do that, then I think it's okay. But like I said, there is a school of thought, and I completely respect it also, that um, you do not have children listen to talking animals at a certain age.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Khan. All right, so I'm going to hop off and go stare at the clouds here. So thank you so much again.
Thank you once again. Thank you
Yes,
very much,
thank you,
Bijal.
Sanjay.
And we shall have this continued. It would be a periodic lecture series. And we would try to bring in experts, people from different walks of life. That is the idea behind Professor Avdesh Kumar Singh lecture series. And you are the first one, once again, from the Alumni Association Team Alumni. We thank you all. Thank you,
Thank
Bijal.
you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye, bye, bye.
Thank you.
Take care. Yes, Bhakti, our hostess.